All right, welcome future IT auditors. Today, we are going to dive into what is honestly probably the most critical piece of your entire audit universe, the operating system. We're going to break down exactly why securing this one layer is the absolute bedrock for every single other control you're ever going to test.
So let's just kick things off with a question that really cuts to the core of IT risk. Think about this. If the operating system that's running a company's most important financial software is weak, how on earth can you, as an auditor, trust any of the application controls that are sitting on top of it? The short answer? You can't. And that's exactly what we're going to get into today.
Okay, so here's the game plan. We'll touch on the layers of controls, then we'll see why the OS is the bedrock. After that, we'll hit the 4 pillars of an OS audit, walk through a real-world example of auditing logical access, and then we'll tie it all back to business risk.
All right, so first up, controls on controls. Look, to be a really effective IT auditor, you have got to understand the hierarchy here. Let's break down the 2 foundational layers you're going to be dealing with all the time.
So on one hand, you've got application controls. Just think of these as super specific rules inside a program. A great example is an accounting system that needs that classic 3-way match, The purchase order, the invoice, the receiving report, they all have to line up before a check gets paid. Then, on the other hand, you have general IT controls, or as you'll hear them called, GITCs. Now, these are way broader. They're the foundational rules for the entire IT environment. We're talking about things like who has those super powerful administrator rights to the whole server.
And this right here is the absolute key. Look, if an application control breaks, maybe one bad payment slips through. It's a problem, for sure, but it's contained. But if a GITC fails, if some unauthorized person gets admin rights, whoa, they can just waltz right past the application control entirely. So that one single failure in a GITC doesn't just create one little problem. It's a systemic risk multiplier. It completely undermines the integrity of every single application control on that machine. It's like the whole house of cards just collapses.
And that, of course, brings us to the big one, the most fundamental GITC of all, the operating system. You have to understand, it's not just another control in a list. It is the bedrock. It's the foundation that everything else is built on.
I mean, think about what the OS actually does. It's the ultimate manager of resources. It's juggling everything from the processor to the memory, all the devices plugged in, and how every single file is managed. It really is the central nervous system of the whole machine.
And this is why it's so critical. If an attacker gets control of the OS, it's game over. They have the keys to the entire kingdom. See, they're operating at a level below all of your other defenses. It doesn't matter what fancy firewall or application control you have. They can literally read data before it even gets encrypted. They can change the security logs to cover their tracks. They can bypass pretty much any control you have in place, whether it's in your apps or your databases, everything.
There's actually a technical term for this in the security world, the Trusted Computing Base, or TCB for short. The easiest way to think about it is it's all the bits and pieces of a system, hardware, software, everything, that you have no choice but to trust for the system to be secure. And for you as an auditor, this is so important to remember. The OS is the absolute core of that TCB, because if you can't trust the operating system, then you can't trust a single piece of evidence that comes off that machine. Not the logs, not the reports, not the data, nothing. It's that simple.
Okay, so we've hammered home why the OS is so ridiculously important. Now let's get practical and focus on how you actually audit it. And a really good way to do this is to break it down into 4 key pillars.
These are the 4 big areas your audit is going to focus on. First up, logical access. Basically, who has the keys? Who are the administrators? Second, configuration and hardening. Are they using weak default settings? Things like guest accounts. Are those disabled like they should be? Third, patch management. Simple question. Are they actually applying critical security updates on time? And fourth, logging and monitoring. If a bad guy does get in, is there any system in place to even notice it happened? We're going to do a bit of a deep dive on that first one, logical access.
All right, so let's dive into that first pillar. Let's really walk through a practical example of auditing logical access so you can see what this looks like on a real audit engagement.
Okay, your starting point for any test is always the control objective. This is just a fancy way of saying, what is this control trying to do? What's its purpose? So in this example, the goal is pretty straightforward. Make sure that someone, a manager, a system owner, is regularly, periodically looking at the list of who has access to their systems and saying, yep, this person still needs it, that person doesn't.
All right, next up is your audit procedure. This is where you define exactly how you, the auditor, are going to test if that objective is being met. So, for our example, the procedure is simple. You're going to inspect the documentation from the most recent access review. You're basically turning the what, the objective, into the how, your specific action.
And then finally, you get to the most important part, the audit evidence. This is your proof. This is everything. It is absolutely not enough for someone to just tell you, oh yeah, we did the review. Nope. You need to get your hands on the actual evidence. That means the list of users they reviewed, the actual sign-off from the manager, and maybe even the help desk tickets that show that, hey, they found someone who didn't need access anymore and they actually removed it.
And here's another great example of this. Let's say your procedure is to verify the company's password policy. Things like password length and complexity. Well, your evidence wouldn't be someone telling you the policy, it would be a screenshot of the live system settings. You take that screenshot and you compare it side by side with the official written policy document. See how that works? You are always, always, always tying your procedure directly to real, tangible proof.
Now, as you're doing all these tests, there's a really sneaky but super serious risk you need to keep an eye out for. It's called privilege creep. Here's how it works. Someone gets hired. They get access to do their job. Then they get promoted or move to another department. They get new access for their new job, but nobody ever takes the old access away. And this happens over and over. Pretty soon, you've got employees with this huge collection of unnecessary permissions, and that creates this massive ticking time bomb of a risk if their account ever gets compromised.
Okay, last section. Let's pull this all together and connect these nitty-gritty technical tests back to the big picture. I mean, why does a company's leadership care about a password setting or an access review? This is the all-important so what question you always need to be able to answer.
Because here's the thing, your findings never exist in a vacuum. When you find that a server is missing a critical security patch, that's not just some techie problem for the IT department. No, that can be a direct violation of major compliance frameworks, things like NIST, ISO, or even Sarbanes-Oxley. Your work as an auditor is what provides that crucial objective evidence. You're the one who draws the clear line connecting a technical control weakness directly to a real business risk and a potential regulatory failure.
So if you remember one thing from this, let it be this. Always ask what's underneath. When you're testing a control in some fancy application, stop and look down. Look at its foundation. Ask yourself, is the operating system it's running on actually secure? Because if that foundation is built on sand, it doesn't matter how strong the rest of the building looks. Everything built on top of it is at risk. And that, right there, is the bedrock of IT assurance.